bring that way up. Oh, good morning. I'm so glad to be with you all today. It's good. And it feels good to see some faces. I can't tell you as a preacher, to see some smiles out there and faces I haven't seen in years feels really, really good. So I'm so thankful for that. For Valentine's Day this year, Becky and I, my wife Becky and I, we got tickets to see the Oregon Symphony as they played live the soundtrack to Disney's Coco, along with the movie as they projected it up on a big screen above the orchestra. And it was in the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall downtown. This concert was 2 weeks ago today. And since it was a Sunday, time was a little bit tight. We had to rush out of church right as soon as it got over and try to get downtown, and we got in line at a brunch spot down there to have a bite to eat. And when we got in line, we were told to expect about a 15 to 20 minute wait at this restaurant. And we were like, okay, we could do that. So we thought we'd have plenty of time to finish our meal and move along. But after about 20 minutes of waiting, we didn't seem like we were quite close to getting in there. So Becky goes up again to ask the hostess if we were close to our time. And she said, oh, there's actually about 10 groups still ahead of you. And all of a sudden, we were like, whoa, we're going to be cutting it close here. We might miss our show or the start of the show if we try to wait this long. But just then, I heard a voice behind me. Someone just said, excuse me. And I turned around and I saw a man who was about in his probably early 50s. He said, do you want to join us? We got a table for 4 and there's just 2 of us. So I looked at Becky and went, sure, okay, we'll go join you. So we walked over to it was like an outdoor greenhouse that they had set up on the sidewalk. It was heated inside, and that's where they had a little table. And went over to join this man and his girlfriend at their table. And we kind of figured that they'd sit on one end and we'd sit on our end and just kind of keep to ourselves. But that wasn't what they had in mind. They sat on the 2 seats across from us, and we sat facing them. And for the next 45 minutes to an hour, I had brunch with Rob and Bernhild, total strangers, and we had a wonderful time telling stories about our lives and our histories and our careers. And when we finally paid for our meal and we rushed off to the theater, Becky and I felt so deeply honored by this experience. On one hand, I admitted that I probably wouldn't have done what Rob and Bernhild did for us, which was humbling. And on top of it, this happened in downtown Portland in a time of COVID, probably the last place I expected to have a surprise meal with strangers. But this breaking of bread carried with it some risk, and somehow that even made it a little bit more special. We left the restaurant that morning with hearts full of joy and hope, and I've decided to try and share some of that feeling with you all today. It's no secret that the time we're living in is difficult. Studies continually show that stress and mental health issues are growing at unprecedented rates. We are potentially as anxious and depressed as we have ever been. And yet, amid a mental health crisis, I see massive amounts of compassion and empathy in the world. In fact, sometimes it seems to me that the folks that spend the most time praying for those who are suffering or raising their voices against injustice also have the toughest time digging themselves out from beneath the stress and the anxiety and the depression that comes with it. It weighs on them. And it makes me wonder about the age-old question, is it possible to have too much of a good thing? In verse 13 of today's psalm, David, he's writing from a place of crisis. And he mentions enemies who are lying about him and threatening him, and the entirety of the psalm is really David just begging God to have his back because he's scared. But then here in verse 13, he writes, I believe I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. It's a hopeful message. And at the same time, it reveals something about David. He doesn't see the goodness of God in that moment. He's clinging to the hope of it being there in the future, but at least for now, it seems like he thinks the goodness of God is dwelling somewhere else. I can't tell if David is right or wrong here. Maybe it's a bit of both, because I don't believe that God's goodness leaves us in times of crisis, but I do believe that we can be blinded from seeing it. The last time I preached, I talked about the concept of negativity dominance, this psychological phenomenon that tries to explain why, for some reason, negative things seem to carry more weight in our minds and our spirits. Pleasant interactions disappear from our memory, but awkward encounters keep us up at night. Grief takes a lot longer to get rid of than joy. And I think this is what's happening to David. He is so consumed by fear that he can't see the goodness. And this isn't just an Old Testament problem. In every one of our lives, we've had times where we are overwhelmed with hardship and have a hard time seeing beyond it. What concerns me, though, is it feels like we're living in times of crisis more often these days, doesn't it? Like, is it true that the world is more violent or more unstable or more impoverished than it was back in the days of David? No, probably not. But we have the unique challenge today of being constantly informed of the various crises going on in the world. Thanks to the internet, we often find out about a tragedy within seconds of its beginning, even if it occurred on the opposite side of the globe. And it's not just the availability of this information, but there's a cultural aspect to it as well. We are expected to feel for those who are suffering. We are expected to spend energy and time using our voices on their behalf. And we're expected to be constantly reading and watching and learning so we can have the most up-to-date information about what's going on in the world. And again, all these things by themselves are good. But in the midst of it, we can feel like if we stop feeling, or we stop speaking out, or we stop learning, even for just a moment, then in that moment, we're failing. It feels like we have to be all in all the time. But we weren't made for that. A few months ago, I took a group of our high schoolers to see a show by an author, theologian, and former pastor named Rob Bell. At one point in the show, Rob asked the audience if there was anyone out there who was really sad tonight, and a bunch of hands shot up into the air. But Rob pointed to one of the hands that raised up, and he asked him if he would come up onto stage. And they sat next to each other in chairs on the stage. And Rob asked this man, probably in his late 20s, asked him what he did for a living. And this young man just started to light up with joy as he told about his career as a middle school drama teacher. He just loved what he did, and you can see it. His entire face shone as he explained how it brought him so much joy to be a safe space for students and to help them learn and help them figure out how to express themselves through the media of drama. And then Rob asked him another question. He said, "So you raised your hand. Why are you sad tonight?" And like a switch was flipped, the temperature of the room changed as this young man told us that just a week ago, his fiancée, who he believed to be his soulmate, had left him with zero notice, just a note and a ring left on the dressing stand. And Rob said to him, "So you've got this amazing job, which brings you so much joy, and you absolutely love it. And at the same time, while you go and do that job, you are carrying inside of you this deep, deep grief of losing your soulmate." He said, "That's okay. That joy can sit next to this grief because we have room for both." And I think what he said there is absolutely true. We can hold grief and empathy and joy and thankfulness at the same time. In fact, I think I'm willing to go one step further. Not only can we hold these things together, but we must. I think this is a fundamental part of what it means to be human. Think about this for a second. If you knew someone who was entirely happy all the time, nothing ever went wrong for them, it's like they had one speed and the speed was the smiley face emoji, they probably wouldn't really seem real, right? And at the same time, if you knew someone who sat in the darkness, maybe praying and fasting from morning until night every single day, we would get this feeling that somehow they're missing out on some fundamental piece of what it means to truly be alive. This tension, this balancing act between the good and the bad is necessary. I think the season of Lent is an excellent example of this. Over these 40 days, we are simultaneously waiting for Jesus to be brutally crucified and for him to miraculously rise from the dead. Somebody tell me how to feel. Are we mourning the coming death, or are we eagerly awaiting the celebration? The answer is both. The death and the resurrection we anticipate, they're intertwined, yet they produce in us completely opposite emotions. And for some reason, this story has resonated so deeply with humanity that it has endured for nearly 2,000 years. Because deep down, we know that we can't truly live just by feeling the good or just by feeling the bad. We need both. So how do we correct ourselves when we get out of balance? Culturally, we are experiencing a massive correction that targets apathy, informing us of our privilege and calling us to become newly educated, more empathetic, and to use our privilege by joining with those who are suffering. All good things. And we should also know what to do when the pendulum swings too far the other way and we get out of balance in the opposite direction. What do we do when we get so deep in suffering, either our own or others, that we begin to lose sight of joy for ourselves? In the earliest stages of the pandemic, the Office star, John Krasinski, recognized the weight the world was taking on in lockdown, and he started a YouTube show called SGN, standing for Some Good News. For the first few months of the pandemic, he produced the show along with guest hosts that were other celebrities, and their sole purpose was lifting up positive and heartwarming news stories. And this isn't just an isolated trend. More and more people are starting to get this sense that we have some sort of need for good news. For example, Hoda Kotb hosts a positive news segment called The Morning Boost on the Today Show every morning. And even the Oregonian's getting on it, as last year they actually launched an outlet dedicated to positive news, which is called This is Oregon. And there's even better news on top of all this. Though all these efforts are going on to bring us good news, we don't have to wait for them to bring it to us. We can go and find it ourselves. My favorite TED Talk of all time is called "You Want to Be Happy? Be Grateful," by a Benedictine monk and interfaith scholar named David Steindl-Rast. He says, "Gratitude is the master key to happiness that we can find in every single moment. Practicing gratitude is very simple," he says. "It's as easy as crossing the street. You just stop, then you look, then go." First, we have to stop. If we don't build stop signs into our lives, and our busyness will blow right past most of our opportunities to be grateful. These stop signs might look like morning meditation, or praying before a meal, or notes scribbled on the bathroom mirror, or even something as simple as just deep breaths. Once we stop, next we have to look. Open up our eyes, our ears, all of our senses to the wonderful richness which is given to us. What is the opportunity given in this moment? We can look for ways to open up our hearts for the opportunities to bring joys to others, because nothing makes us happier than when we are all happy together. Then, once we've looked for the opportunity of the moment, we go. We get to actually go do something about it. Sometimes the opportunity is to do something that's difficult, but these are also opportunities for us to get creative, to be loving, and to improve our world. But most of the time, Steindl-Rast says, most of the time the opportunity that is given to us in the moment is just to enjoy it. And according to Steindl-Rast, these three simple steps of stop, look, and go can not only change our life, but can help transform the entire world. Now, in this season of Lent, one of the oldest traditions in Christianity is to undertake a Lenten fast. I've practiced fasting from food a few times in my life, and the way I was taught to do it is that when I would feel hunger, then that feeling is supposed to remind me about, to think or to pray or to meditate on whatever it is I'm fasting for. And food fasts aren't a regular part of my spiritual practices, but the idea generally makes sense to me. Lenten fasts often apply a similar principle, just often with a different omission rather than food entirely. I know people who have used Lent as a chance to give up social media or their morning coffee, or people who will fast from video games. And usually it's all a similar premise of, okay, when I feel the emptiness that comes from cutting out this one thing, there's some sort of vacuum that's created there, and in that vacuum I remember to focus on whatever I need to focus on this Lenten season. And this is fine, but I wonder if this year, if we might, instead of trying a fast of omission, if we might try a fast of addition together. What if, instead of taking something out, we actually added something really simple in? Here's my proposal. For the rest of this Lenten season, anytime we see something beautiful, or we feel joy, or we recognize the goodness around us, let's say it out loud. Bonus points if you say it to somebody else. It could be as simple as pointing out how beautiful the cherry blossoms are as they begin to bloom. Or it could be saying, I'm glad we did this, after you visit a friend. Or something like, I appreciate you, to your barista in the morning. What do you think? Can we try this together? My hope and my prayer for us this Lenten season is that we can grow together in our ability to be grateful. Grateful for the opportunities that both death and life have to offer us, and grateful in a way that is outspoken and contagious so we can do our part in building a happier world. Amen.